I'm okay. It was much more emotional than I thought, and I found it very hard to speak outside the court.
The man was enormous. Cliff Richard, who is 84 years old, opens out about everything in his memoir. On the 14th of October in 1940, Cliff Richard was born as Harry Roger Webb in Lucknow, which was located in British India. The early years of Cliff's life were marked by substantial instability and a strong will to persevere. Following the attainment of independence by India, his family relocated to England in 1948, ultimately settling in the county of Hertfordshire. When he was a child, he encountered the problems of poverty and cultural dislocation, as well as the difficulty of transitioning to life in Britain after the war. But music turned out to be his release and his passion, and by the time he was in his teens, he had already began to fantasize about a career in performance. As a stage performer, he used the name Cliff Richard. He chose the name Richard as a tribute to Little Richard, who was one of his musical heroes, and Cliff as a representation of the rock and roll. Cliff made his debut on the British music scene in the late 1950s, a period of time when rock and roll was still relatively new and a source of considerable controversy. Often regarded as the first genuine rock and roll song to originate from the United Kingdom, Move It was his breakthrough hit in 1958, one of those songs that even John Lennon admitted at one point as being revolutionary. Almost immediately, Cliff became the United Kingdom's equivalent of Elvis Presley with the help of his backing band, The Shadows, which was formerly known as The Drifters. In his younger years, he was known for his smooth guitar-playing demeanor, which won the hearts of young people all over the country, including teenagers. Cliff Richard not only maintained his success throughout the 1960s, but he also managed to maintain his relevance despite the fact that the Beatles and the British invasion were the two major forces that transformed the musical scene. His reputation was further cemented by the fact that he starred in a string of comedic musical films that were extremely successful, such as The Young Ones in 1961, Summer Holiday in 1963, and Wonderful Life in 1964. Because of his magnetic screen presence and impeccable image, he became a fan favorite among audiences of all ages, which enabled him to bridge the gap between different generations. But Cliff's narrative isn't just about his success in the music industry and the entertainment industry. Additionally, it is a path of personal transformation and awakening to one's inner spirituality. It was in 1966 when he made a public declaration of his Christian faith, a choice that would go on to have a significant influence on his life and career. In addition to becoming active in a variety of philanthropic projects and religious programming, he started to incorporate more moral messages into his concerts. In contrast to a significant number of his colleagues, Cliff was able to preserve his reputation for honesty and self-control. Despite spending decades in the public eye, he has consistently maintained a private life that is mainly dignified and free from scandal. He has never been married. Cliff underwent a second round of self-reinvention during the 1970s and 1980s, shifting from the role of an adolescent idol to that of an adult pop musician. Over the course of several decades, he was able to produce one of the most remarkable accomplishments in the profession. A number of his albums, including Devil Woman 1976, We Don't Talk Anymore 1979, Wired for Sound 1981, and the Christmas favorite Mistletoe and Wine 1988, earned him a significant amount of success. Cliff was able to reach new audiences without alienating his initial fan base, because he was able to alter his style while still remaining true to his principles without compromising his integrity. The fact that he worked with modern producers and was willing to explore new musical directions demonstrated a level of adaptability that many of his contemporaries struggled to achieve. Cliff Richard continued to be a symbol of endurance and decency despite the fact that he engaged in a number of problems, such as court fights and a high-profile investigation in the tens of the 2000s, which ultimately resulted in no charges being brought against him and universal compassion. In for his contributions to the world of music and charity, Queen Elizabeth Roman II bestowed upon him the honor of a knighthood in 1995, making him the first rock and roll artist to be honored in this manner. The knighthood was not merely a personal honor for the recipient. Additionally, it was a recognition of his cultural influence and the long-standing contributions he had made to the nation of Britain. Cliff Richard has a long list of accomplishments and records to his name. It is a startling monument to his everlasting appeal that he is the only musician to have had hits placed in the top 5 in the United Kingdom for 8 straight decades. His name is frequently cited alongside the names of the greatest musicians in the history of music, and he has sold more than 250 million recordings all over the world. His dedicated followers, who are referred to as Cliffettes or just Cliff fans, span multiple generations and continue to possess an unwavering devotion to him. His ability to combine nostalgia with accessibility is shown in the fact that his Christmas singles, in particular, have become a regular part of the holiday ritual in the United Kingdom. Cliff Richard, on the other hand, is remembered for something considerably more significant than the statistics and the fame he achieved. His determination to maintain his sense of reality, his bravery in openly discussing his religious beliefs, and his tenacity in the face of challenges are all admirable qualities. Not only has he used his platform to entertain, but he has also used it to inspire others, providing an alternative role model in a culture that is frequently characterized by excess and instability. Cliff Richard, one of the most iconic names in British popular music, has led a life that, in many ways, defies the typical expectations that are placed upon international celebrities on a daily basis. An uncommon and frequently debated component of Richard's public persona is the fact that he has never been married, despite the fact that he is revered and adored by millions of people at the same time. In spite of the fact that his love life is frequently the focus of media curiosity, it has been characterized by a greater degree of self-control and emotional complexity than by scandal or transitory partnerships. A profoundly sincere letter that Richard wrote in October 1961 to his first serious girlfriend, the Australian dancer Delia Wickies, resulted in the revelation of one of the most profound insights into Richard's personal decisions, which came to light decades after the event in question had taken place. In the letter, which was 3 pages long and written when Richard was only 21 years old, he expressed the agony of having to choose between his own personal happiness and his rapidly developing career. The couple had been in a committed relationship for a period of 18 months, which is a considerable amount of time for someone who is still in the very beginning stages of their popularity. Richard wrote in an open and honest manner, admitting that as a pop artist at the pinnacle of his burgeoning success, he felt obligated to give up one priceless thing, which was the right to any permanent relationship with any special girl. In his letter, he described the decision as being among the most challenging he had ever made. He expressed his hope that it would not be too detrimental to her, but it was evident that he was aware that it would be. He went on to explain that it was inconceivable for him to give up his musical profession, which had become the driving force behind his very identity. In addition, he conveyed a profound sense of duty toward his family by stating that, ever since the unexpected passing of his father, his mother and sisters had grown to rely on him completely. He recognized that the entertainment industry had been ingrained in his DNA, and that he would be completely lost without it. Richard advised Wicks to move on with her life, and find happiness with someone who could provide her with the kind of life she deserved in one of the most heartfelt and altruistic parts of the letter. Find someone who is free to love you as you deserve to be loved, he stated in his writing, and someone who is able to marry you. This was a moment of emotional maturity and self-awareness, revealing a young man who was struggling with the conflict between love and responsibility, as well as making a decision that would eventually determine the course of his life. Decades later, when Delia Wicks passed away in 2010 at the age of 71 after a long battle with cancer, her brother Graham disclosed that she had continued to be profoundly impacted by Richard's decision. In addition to describing Richard as a really charming individual, he added that she had been left in utter devastation by the separation, an example of the emotional cost of fame that is frequently hidden from the view of the general public. It was a heartbreak that was quiet but lasted for a long time. In the year that followed his breakup with Wicks, when Richard was 22 years old, he embarked into a brief romantic connection with Una Stubbs, a British actress who is known for her bright personality and widespread popularity. Although she was already well known for her ability and exuberant attitude, Stubbs was quickly becoming a mainstay in the British entertainment industry. Richard's constant yearning for real companionship in the midst of the obstacles of celebrity life was reflected in their relationship, despite the fact that it was only short-lived. With the beginning of his relationship with dancer Jackie Irving in the latter half of the 1960s, Richard's romantic life took yet another significant turn. He fondly recalled that time period, describing Irving as totally gorgeous and recalling how they had previously been inseparable. He also recalled how they had been separated at one point, more than just a passing fling. Their relationship was really serious. The situation was one in which he seemed to be really contemplating getting married. It is likely that the constraints and complications of his public career contributed to the eventual dissolution of this relationship, just as they did with earlier relationships. Later on, Irving tied the knot with the singer and actor Adam Faith, and Richard was once again left to quietly contemplate the possibilities that could have been. Richard's relationship with tennis player Sue Barker, which began in the 1980s, is commonly considered to be the most well-documented and frequently speculated upon romantic relationship of his whole life. Barker, who had previously won the French Open and reached the semi-finals of Wimbledon, was at the pinnacle of her athletic career when she got together with Richard in 1982, when she was 25 years old. Their romance rapidly captivated the interest of the public, which was driven by a combination of the charm of pop stars and the athletic glamour of the athletes. Richard, who had already established himself as a national icon by that point, traveled to Denmark to watch Barker compete in a tennis event. Shortly after arriving in Denmark, the two were photographed together at Wimbledon, which included them holding hands and snuggling. Fans and tabloids alike speculated about whether or not the perpetual bachelor would finally be ready to settle down after seeing the photographs, which caused a frenzy in the media outlets. During an interview that took place in 1983, Richard was candid about the potential of getting married to Barker. He stated, "I'm seeing Sue, the only girl I want to see at the moment, and if marriage comes on the horizon, I shall relish it." This was a rare and vulnerable moment that provided the audience with a view of Richard as a guy who was sincerely contemplating a future that encompassed love, relationship, and family. However, by September of same year, he had adjusted his expectations by stating, "It is not essential to get married, and it is not essential to be a father, but I would like to settle down and have a family one day." During the month of July in 1984, Barker expressed her devotion for Richard by saying, "I love him. He's great, and I'm sure we love each other." Although it was evident that they had a mutual regard and affection for one another, the romance with Richard eventually disappeared. During the year 1986, Barker had began a romantic relationship with the tennis player Stephen Shaw. Richard remarked that he and Barker continued to have a valuable connection. "One of the things that means a great deal to me is that we have a mutual regard for one another." Over the course of his life, Richard has been known to speak openly and honestly about his romantic encounters, providing explanations as to why he eventually decided against getting married. He once conceded, "I've had a few false alarms," and he was right. "At one point in my life, I was in love, but marriage is a significant commitment, and being an artist requires a significant amount of time." The friction that exists between his personal aspirations and his professional commitments is brought to light by his remarks, which highlight the primary struggle that has influenced his romantic choices. The relationship between Richard and the iconic singer and actress Olivia Newton-John was one of the most bittersweet episodes in Richard's previous romantic history. Richard, when asked about his feelings for her, recalled that he had been in love with her in the early 1970s. However, as he stated with a quiet resignation, "At the time when I and many of us were in love with Olivia, she was engaged to someone else. I'm afraid I lost the opportunity to be with her." Richard was one of the many people who had a particular place in their hearts for Newton-John, who was renowned for her elegance, beauty, and talent. A lingering sense of what might have been is reflected in his words, which is a theme that reverberates throughout a number of the relationships that he has mentioned in public. At the age of 84, Sir Cliff Richard, the enduring icon of British pop music, has now made the decision to open up the pages of his life in the most honest and unfiltered way possible. Not only does Richard review his extraordinary 7-decade career in his most recent biography, titled A Head Full of Music and Memories, but he also talks about long-guarded personal insights, memories of stardom, and intimate experiences involving some of the most iconic personalities in the history of music. In a chapter in which he focuses on the sheer cultural significance of the Beatles, and more specifically, on his own affection for Paul McCartney, he makes a disclosure that is one of the most shocking and noteworthy revelations. It is not merely a comment on Paul McCartney's fame that Cliff makes when he says, "He was massive." This is a declaration that reverberates with profound respect on a professional level, appreciation on a competitive level, and psychological weight. Richard, who was already a well-known figure in the United Kingdom by the time the Beatles rose to fame in the early 1960s, explains how the debut of Paul McCartney and the entire explosion of the Beatles transformed the landscape of the music industry virtually overnight. For Cliff, who had dominated the British charts in the 1950s with singles such as Move It and Living Doll, the Beatles presented him with a challenge as well as a revelation. He acknowledges that Paul's artistry, charm, and compositional genius were revolutionary, even to an already established celebrity like himself. He says that Paul's talent was undeniable and revolutionary. The moment when Cliff first heard Love Me Do on the radio is described in great detail throughout the book. Cliff does not shy away from describing the event. He recalls being struck by its freshness and genuineness, and he had an immediate feeling that the Beatles, and Paul in particular, were bringing in something that was completely new. In spite of the fact that he was previously referred to as the British Elvis, Cliff will humbly admit that Paul McCartney was the one who revolutionized the game by creating a sound that was both contemporary and classic. According to what he has written, McCartney possesses an extraordinary capacity to combine lyrical lyricism with universal appeal, so transforming everyday topics into universal phenomena. Cliff admits that Paul did more than just simply compose tunes. His compositions served as the soundtrack to our life and our childhood, in spite of the fact that there were occasional disagreements between pre-Beatles giants like Cliff and the new wave that the Beatles represented. Richard believes that there was never any genuine competition between them. Rather, there was simply mutual respect. This is a particularly poignant aspect of the situation. We were not an adversary. Both of us were pioneers in our own unique ways. In his memoir, he makes this observation. I served as the opening act for a musical revolution that Paul McCartney and the Beatles were able to finish developing. Cliff's insights go much farther, delving into private conversations and experiences that are particularly important to him. He talks about how Paul McCartney always managed to keep a humble demeanor, despite his enormous success. And he mentions that he has run into Paul at several business events and awards ceremonies. He never behaved in a manner befitting a gentleman. Even after he had been needed, Cliff says with a grin, he never failed to be friendly, grounded, and humorous as well. In fact, he remembers having a quiet moment backstage with Paul during a Royal Variety performance. During that time, the two of them laughed about the burden that comes with being an elderly rock star and how they try to remain relevant. Cliff acknowledges that it was at that precise moment that he experienced a rare sense of camaraderie with someone who understood both the weight of celebrity and the isolation that it can often bring. Additionally, the memoir touches on the manner in which both he and McCartney were subjected to severe media scrutiny, as well as the frequently excruciating junction of their personal lives and public image. Cliff gives an honest account of the cost of popularity, reiterating the hidden connection that exists between icons who have been in the public eye since they were young. He reveals that as he was seeing Paul continue to play well into his 70s and 80s, it inspired him to continue to be active in his own profession by traveling, recording, and embracing his heritage with pride rather than withdrawing from it. In the midst of Cliff's deep introspection, there is little doubt that his statements regarding McCartney are more than just expressions of admiration. He was a musical brother who contributed to the formation of the golden period of British pop music, and these songs are an homage to a fellow survivor of fame, Cliff Richard, by expressing his unwavering admiration for Paul McCartney throughout his entire life. Not only pays tribute to a music legend, but he also places himself in an honest manner inside the narrative of that age. He acknowledges the giants who came after him, while also celebrating the vital role he played in opening the door. Cliff Richard, who is already in his 9th decade, has written a memoir that is more than just a tell-all. It is a demonstration of the enduring power of talent, the strength of friendship, and the intricate mosaic that is the history of music. His musings on Paul McCartney provide a unique glimpse into the mutual adoration that exists between two of the most cherished musicians in Britain. Both of them are legends in their own right, and they will be inextricably intertwined in the annals of the historical narrative of modern music.